talk about it everywhere. So it's true, for example, that, say take last November, it was a really horrifying month. The fact that we would it was momentous events that happened in Eastern Europe, I'm not denying it. But the fact that we could celebrate the triumph of love, nonviolence, and so on, when at the very same period we were carrying out monstrous terrorism and in fact destroying Christianity, a battle against Christianity in large measure, passed without comment. Well, actually, you can talk about it now, not among intellectuals. Like you won't find any writing about it, but at the beginning of the month I happened to be in Ireland, and not that it was a deep insight, but I just predicted it. This is what's going to happen in the coming month. November 30th, at the end of the month, I was one of the speakers at the Boston College Memorial, which is the only one I know of. And there's a huge audience, and they could understand, and others can understand. Well, that's changed. Didn't happen before, and there are many other things like it. The country has become a lot more civilized than it was. That's substantially the result of the activism of the 1960s and its aftermath. And it's the main reason why the 60s are so despised. If you read the intellectual culture, that's the time of troubles, kids going wild, what are we going to do, and so on. Well, yeah, they were going wild, they were civilizing the country. That's when, and it was a real move forward in democratization. A lot of things came out of it. Civil rights, women's rights, concern about the environment, opposition to aggression. Right up to the present, I'm going to say things like the international solidarity movement and all kinds of things. They're part of the activism of the 60s and its aftermath. And it was an immediate response to that too. It's not discussed much. But across the board, across the spectrum, there was real horror in the 60s. And a lot of it's in print. Because they didn't know enough to they didn't figure anyone was going to read these things, so it was published. For example, one book you should certainly read, if you haven't done so yet, came out in the early 70s by the Trilateral Commission. That's liberal internationalists. That's Carter. That's where his administration came from. Europe, Japan, and the United States. The book's called The Crisis of Democracy. As soon as it came out, I figured this book isn't going to be in print very long, so I got about 20 copies of it, put them in the MIT library, and indeed it went out of print pretty soon, but I think it came out here when people forgot. But with the book was very frank. It said the 60s, this is the liberal side of the spectrum. It said the 60s were a dangerous period. It was a period in which people who were usually passive and apathetic and obedient became kind of engaged and started pressing their interests and concerns in the political arena. And this led to an excess of democracy, which is unacceptable. And we have to have more moderation in democracy. And it proposed various methods to do that. Some of them involve universities right now, in fact. One of the things they were concerned about was the institutions, I'm quoting now, the institutions responsible for the indoctrination of the young. The schools, the universities, the churches, they weren't doing their job. These kids were, look what they're doing. So we have to be stricter in indoctrination of the young. And if you look at what happened after that, and we're now seeing a number of things were done. One of them was to try to ensure that students would come out of college with a heavy debt. That was a disciplinary effect. So, tuition started shooting up and all sorts of other things. And in fact, you now have what the press is denouncing as riots in, say, California and other places, because people can't afford to go to school. In fact, California, maybe the richest place in the world, is destroying the best higher public education system anywhere. They've raised tuition so high that it's practically like private universities. And it's very likely that the jewels and the crown, Berkeley and UCLA, will probably be privatized. They're virtually private now. And they'll become kind of Ivy League colleges. And the rest of the system will decline, low level. state colleges. Well, students are protesting, so they're rioting. They're terrible. This is terrible. And many other methods have been used, and interestingly, they haven't succeeded. The activism's continued, and it's grown. I mentioned the international solidarity movement, but remember that that's a movement from the 80s, and incidentally, mostly church-based. It came from, not from the universities, it came from the Midwest, Southwest, a lot of it from evangelical churches. And it spread. There's now an international solidarity movement all over the world. There was never anything like that before, and many other things. So I just don't agree with the premises. I think a lot's happened. And not enough, never enough. But it means that protest and activism today can start from a much higher plane. We've got a legacy that we can use. I mean, propaganda will try to tell you nothing's happened. But anyone who was alive in the 50s knows quite a lot has happened. I would say Princeton. I was here 50 years ago. There were no women. Nor at MIT, for that matter.
Well, MIT was always co-ed.
Technically. But MIT had, when I got there in the 50s, there was like, maybe 10 women around. So yeah, technically it was co-ed. But now it's 50% women, a third minority, informal relations press, a lot of activism. And that happened everywhere. Okay, these things civilized the country. Not enough, but a lot. And they're bitterly opposed, naturally. Elites don't like police power and authority. They don't like the decline in the ability of the institutions responsible for the indoctrination of the young to do their work properly. But that's all good. So I think we don't have to, what you can ask whether what's happening is fast enough to deal with the problems that are arising, and maybe not. After all, there are real crises coming. Maybe the trajectory of change is too slow. Well, if that's true, it will be the Beatles and the bacteria.